If I can repeat the request, if people could please type their names in from Brantford panelists. Thank you.
All right, we are live. So this meeting of the Downtown Brantford Improvement Task Force for Thursday, December the 16th, 2021 is now called to order. I believe the roll call has been taken.
The roll's been taken.
Excellent. First matter of business for today is the election of the chair. Do we have any nominations for chair? Councillor Van Tilburg.
Thank you, Mr. I nominate Mayor Davis. Second.
Okay. Mayor Davis, do you accept?
But I didn't have to nominate myself. That would be embarrassing.
Will you accept that nomination?
Yes, I do.
Are there any other nominations for chair?
I move nominations be closed.
Seeing no objections, nominations are closed. Mayor Davis, you are officially acclaimed as chair, and as such, I pass the imaginary gavel over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Wall, and an excellent job that you did chairing 2 seconds of that meeting. That was great. So, yeah, as you know, Councillor McCurry, he may still be a member, but he and I have done I call it the mini cabinet shuffle, and he's taking on police service board responsibilities, and I'm assuming responsibility for this board, or this task force. And in fact, as some of you can attest, I've been out and around downtown. I've been interviewing some of the BIA members and getting a sense of where people are at, and we'll continue to do that through our Christmas break. So with that, before we get into the business, I have to, of course, go through the procedural rules, and that please remember that if you're a member of the task force, that you got to keep your video on at all times, but please remain muted unless you're speaking to avoid feedback. And if we do have a service interruption that affects quorum, and Melanie, we are at quorum right now or not? I think we are. Yeah.
Yep, we're very comfortably beyond quorum.
Right. Well, if we hit quorum because people have to leave, then we recess for up to 15 minutes to see if we can reestablish quorum. If we can't, we're automatically adjourned. And that the rules for delegations and the council procedural bylaw apply to this task force. So does anybody have a declaration of pecuniary interest that they need to make regarding today's agenda? And if you do, you'd physically raise your hand so I could recognize you. I'm not seeing any physically raised hands. Okay. So let's move into the items for consideration. And we have, we'll start with the first consent item on the agenda, which is to receive the monthly reports from the various working groups. So if I can get a mover and a seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Vanderstelt, second by Councillor Utley. So let's, we have received prior to this meeting a sort of a point form summary of what those 3 subgroups committees have been up to. Now's your chance to ask any questions, make any suggestions. As you can see, most of them are well along the road or path to coming back to us in January with some specific recommendations, but here's your chance for another one of those subgroups to ask some questions or maybe make some suggestions. So I think Councillor Wall, did you take your hand down? You had it up there for a second. Yes, Councillor Wall.
Thank you, Chair Davis, and you're also doing a great job. I wasn't sure if you were going to ask, but if not, I will. Could we just have an overview? Enough?
Excellent idea. So let's do, first of all, the first one that's in our notes. And that is the Community Support Working Group. And Sue Evenden, are you? I think, guys. Yep. You're there, Sue. You can't hide. I see you in the participant box. Oh, there you are.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Through the chair. Yes, we have actually met twice since the last time that this task force convened. And one of the things that I wanted to bring to this group that was just completed and reviewed with the working group at yesterday's meeting, and so it was not included necessarily in the written report, was we did have the findings from our jurisdictional scan, which focused on communities that had downtown improvement plans, which had a strong focus on supporting marginalized and vulnerable citizens in the downtown, or featured some type of a drop-in. And so we did have quite a few communities in both Canada and outside of Canada that we had a look at. And what we found, sort of common themes, were such things as communities having individuals who functioned as ambassadors or navigators. So not necessarily outreach, but just feet on the ground, engaging with individuals and then passing off to specialized resources or outreach teams or medical resources if needed. There were several examples of having a simplified point of contact and supporting materials for individuals, residents, and businesses, so that in certain situations they know who to reach out to, what the phone numbers are, what the hours of operation are. There were lots of examples of enhanced coordination between outreach teams, health and social care organizations. There was a recurring theme around hygiene stations and washrooms, and also some ideas on more effectively supporting individuals with very complex needs. However, we also did do a deep dive into the idea of daytime drop-in, because that was something that was featured in most, if not all, of the communities that we did look at, and we know there was an interest from this task force. We did speak with colleagues, municipal colleagues from both Windsor and Kingston that have some fairly highly built out, services, more of an integrated care hub as opposed to just a place to come and have a coffee and hang out during the day. So these were more focused around bringing services in and trying to engage individuals with services. And so, from that, I think what we took away from those conversations is that the idea of a day drop-in it certainly has many merits and benefits. I would characterize it as an approach with caution type of idea, because Kingston in particular, they're in a circumstance now where they've been supporting the center through their federal and provincial pandemic benefits, and they've been directed by their municipal council to have a third-party organization review the center prior to approving any continuation. And that's because of some of the experiences that have arisen as a result of the operation of this center, which they described to us as being not directly in the downtown core, within walking distance of the core. And what they have found is that the businesses and organizations in the downtown core are still experiencing high levels of some of the challenges that they reported prior to the integrated care hub operating. So people were still being drawn down to the core for various reasons, and there were still reports of social disorder and petty crime as there had been before. And of concern, I think, in this community, they certainly felt that they had drawn people from outside of their community. Now, that particular version did have overnight beds, so that may be the reason they had some emergency low barrier overnight beds. And they also talked about, that the businesses and residents around the vicinity of the drop-in center had concerns that had been raised, and we certainly experienced that when we opened our winter shelter a couple of winters ago. And then finally, it's a pretty expensive and it's a pretty costly intervention. And so, I think that it's certainly something that the group around the table feels. I think, I think the working group feels that this is an idea that needs to be brought forward and explored, and they will probably support it. However, I think that it's one of those types of ideas that will certainly need further investigation and study in terms of how exactly, if it does move forward, how exactly we would recommend that it move forward in this community. So I will
Great.
leave it there because I think a lot of the other information is captured in your written report.
All right, so questions for Sue or any other comments or suggestions for this particular subcommittee? I'll go to Councillor Van Tilburg.
Thank you, Sue, for that well-rounded report. I much appreciate it and the context. Washrooms and hygiene. What can we do? That's my question. What can we do and when can we do it?
So I may defer to Marlene to also weigh in on this because I know she's been looking probably a little more closely at this issue. There are different examples from porta potties to public. In some communities they do have public washrooms in their downtown square, for example. So those are some of the examples. If you do have a daytime drop-in, then sometimes you can address the issue that way by having the hygiene station, laundry, and washrooms available at the drop-in. So those are options. I'm going to leave it there because we really haven't dug into too much specific research, but I don't know if Marlene has anything further.
Marlene?
So through the chair, Marlene Miranda, Community Services and Social Development. This was also brought up at the Safety and Security meeting, as you're aware, and we are looking at bringing some recommendations on how to pilot some different options for the task force's consideration. So we're hopeful to bring that forward in January.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right, we'll go to Paul Pisani from the Chamber. Paul, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Sue, you mentioned that you've at least started the analysis of the different communities and the different systems and approaches that seem to find success. I'm wondering if your group has got to the level of detail where you're looking at the economics, where the funding's coming from. Is it entirely municipal? Are there other levels of government contributing? Are there business working groups that are contributing as well? I'm curious, first and foremost, about the communities that struck your group as the leaders that are setting the most positive example, and what sort of economics go into the different strategies that have been successful.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you. It's a very good question. And I would answer that by saying that I think the strongest models are the models that have multiple funding levers to pull. So they have multiple funding streams. So they're not relying solely on one level of government or one time limited funding option, because then that really limits sustainability. And we've seen that, for example, with the Brantford Downtown Outreach, where one source of funding ended, then there was a pause, then you had to take the program down and start it back up. So that's not ideal. And there definitely are, to your question, some good examples that we can reference where you have participation from both the nonprofit sector, the government sector, and the business sector. And that's probably the approach that we would recommend.
Anything further, Paul?
Just as a follow-up, is it worthwhile getting select members from this task force or any working groups to sort of tour some of the processes in these neighboring communities that at least are close by to see success, to see what strategies are working? Or are we casting a really wide net across Canada at this point? Like maybe the logistics of that doesn't work.
Through the chair, I think that's an excellent suggestion. I suspect that we're at a point in the pandemic now where it would likely be some kind of a virtual event, even if the organizations were in close proximity. However, we can certainly look into that. There are probably 2 or 3 examples within an hour of Brantford that would be worth looking at.
So is that something, Sue, that might be done, could be pursued by the subgroup in January?
Mr. Chair, yes, we will do that.
Okay, all right. So any other questions for Sue or comments? Not seeing any. Okay, thank you very much, Sue. So we'll now move on to computer background here. I rarely have technical difficulties. And now I have. There we go. Okay, so we'll move on to the next subcommittee. And that would be, we're looking for an overview. This is economic development, tourism, and community programs. Councillor Utley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, and first off, I'd like to thank our team, especially Aaron Wallace, who's done a lot of heavy lifting on getting us to where we are, and also our team members, Dr. Heidi Northwood, Jacinda Breetzma from Conestoga, Barbara Sutherland, the chair of BIA, Bonnie Whitlow, Sarah Monroe, Alan Waterfield, Gagan Batra, Rick Cox, Mercy, sorry, I can't remember Mercy's last name, Laurie Doan, Kevin Finney, and I may have missed one or two, so I apologize for that. We're fresh from about 20 minutes from our last meeting. So what you're hearing is fresh off the press. We've had a number of meetings, and Aaron was really organized the most of this, so I'm going to speak very briefly and then hand over to Aaron if I've missed anything. So we had short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. The short-term, which are also ongoing, 0 to 6 months, medium-term 1 to 2 years, and long-term 2+ years. So on the short-term, developing a unified approach to grant writing, marketing, and promotion that supports alignment among downtown stakeholders. Support the inclusion and amplification of Indigenous-led events in the downtown. And one of the comments we had with that is for more involvement of Indigenous-led events. And continue with this support to support residential development in the downtown with a focus on infill and intensification. We found that housing intensification will be all three: short, medium, and long-term goals. The other item we're adding to that is international students and making sure that we're a diversified downtown that accommodates many different nationalities and our own Indigenous friends. With the medium term, we looked at developing and supporting a schedule to improve garbage pickup disposal options in the downtown. During that discussion, we decided to give that more of a title, and that's really to improve the image and the beautification of our downtown. And garbage pickup, litter pickup will be a subset of that particular item. We expect there'll be more with that as well. Support and accelerate projects that increase connectivity within the downtown, between the downtown and the Mohawk Greenwich district, and between the downtown and the waterfront park development. Active transportation options and directional signage. Again, there was a lot of discussion on that, and Dr. Northwood said, let's add the word experience in there. We want people and visitors, our own people, to have an experience, a positive experience when they go down. So we've got some wordsmithing to do with some of these recommendations. Encourage and support residents, business and institutions to view the downtown and nearby parks as a unique event and program venue. An example was marathons, pop-up shops, street vendors, and there was a lot more ideas added to that. So there's a lot of things to flush out of that bullet point. Yeah. Complete a downtown parking study with a focus of ensuring parking options support. They support the vision of a downtown that is connected to the waterfront and Mohawk Greenwich district. We really need to look at 15, 20, 25 years from now as to what parking is going to look like, and make sure that we have the land available to, accommodate our citizens and those from Six Nations, New Credit, and the county. As an example, and this is not a criticism, Paris is struggling with parking right now. It's a hugely popular, beautiful little town, and it's proof that there are a lot more visitors than there are parking spots. So I think the county's got a processing plan, a plan in place to accommodate that. Or leverage the historical and cultural heritage of the downtown interactive displays and apps. And a suggestion came up from Bonnie Whitlow to use like a Pokemon map where you can go to certain visuals, interactive displays in the downtown area, and you can look up, pop in the display on your app, and that will come up with information on that display. Great idea. There certainly needs to be a lot more marketing of the experiences that people can have in our downtown area. Sarah Monroe talked about donations, and Sarah, I think you're online. If you want to talk to that a little bit more, can you do that?
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Oh, there you are.
I don't have my camera today. I can't figure out my laptop, but I'm here today virtually. So we have film productions that come here to Brantford. Brantford is increasingly becoming a place for film productions, as a lot of the surrounding communities are just overloaded, especially Hamilton. So we're seeing an increasing number of productions, an increasing number of inquiries. And part of what we do in our roles in tourism is requesting that the productions that come here that provide some kind of inconvenience to individuals, especially in the downtown core, that they consider kickbacks as they relate to legacy funding. So one of those examples is the Grand Exhibit throughout downtown Brantford did receive funding from one of the film productions that came here that year.
Thank you very much, Sarah. One of the, Aaron, do you want to jump in here, and do you want to add anything to short-term, medium-term before I move on?
Through the chair, no, that's a great summary, and I'm impressed that you've remembered all of those feedbacks and edits. So no, that's nothing for me to add.
I believe it was not from memory, I can assure you of that. Thanks anyway. Lastly, there's the longer term, 2+ years, where we discuss the Mohawk Lake District and how, as part of the connectivity between the immediate downtown and the waterfront park, the proposed waterfront park on Grand River Ave, and the improvements to the Mohawk Canal and Mohawk Lake area, plus all the plans that we have in place for museums and Lansdowne Children's Center. One of the concerns we had was to make sure that we don't become defocused on the immediate needs of the downtown. And although they're all connected and they're important, our immediate needs is to address the immediate downtown area first and foremost. Those other things would take place, but I think it was a good point made by Dr. Northwood that we need to be careful not to become defocused. Transit options between the downtown, the city, the county, Six Nations, and New Credit. And Bonnie Whitlow also mentioned that she recommended that we invite New Credit of the Mississaugas to be part of our group. They often feel left out, And I think that's, it's an oversight on our part, nothing intentional, but I think it's important that we make sure they're included moving forward. Are you happy to answer any questions? And if I can't, I've got people that will.
Well, I'll ask you a couple of questions. So coming out of my mini tour earlier this week, talking to some downtown merchants, so I came across, and this is to the point you were making, what can we do right away? And I think the starting point could be the survey that tells us cleanliness is the number one concern that those responding had. So that would seem to suggest probably a focus on the garbage issue and getting that resolved once and for all. But I got something else for you. It's not my idea, but it was given to me, so I'll take it. And that is, how about buy twice a year a scrub down, like a power wash sort of thing. Thought about that. I know that's a really down in the weeds suggestion, but it could help, at the end of the winter, maybe towards the end of the summer, improving the appearance of and increasing the cleanliness of our downtown. The other question I had had to do with parking. And I believe the parking the garage used to be free the first hour, but I can't remember how much it is the first hour now. But would that be considered as an economic incentive? Free parking for an hour? If your committee can look at that.
I can't definitively answer that. I think if I was a user of downtown, it certainly would be an attraction and not a barrier to going downtown. People often say, I can go to Linden Park Mall or any other malls in the city, it doesn't cost me anything. They pay for it some way within their the cost of buying merchandise. But it certainly is a barrier to some people.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you might, because we're not looking for answers today. Today is kind of, hey, thought about this, and would you consider adding this into your list to look at your next meeting? And the last thing, and this comes in an intersection with the downtown streetscape study, which is part of the environmental assessment, because everybody knows we're redoing all the pipes underneath Colburn Dalhousie Street, and as a result, redoing the sidewalks, the lighting, the whole look of the streetscape. And part of that process has brought up that issue of one-way, two-way. And has your committee considered weighing in on that one, or at least talking about it?
We did not.
I'm not advocating one or the other. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it's an issue for some.
I think we have Barbara Sutherland with us, and Barbara, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know there has to have been some discussion with the members of BIA about one-way versus two-way traffic on Dalhousie and Colborne. Could you comment on that, please?
I can, and through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Early. The BIA actually conducted a survey of our members, and it was a door-to-door, a walkabout with Annette and myself. And one of the questions was, do they support one-way or two-way traffic on Dalhousie or Colborne? And some had no opinion because they didn't have experience with it, and others were very adamant about two-way. So I'm going to say that probably 75% of our responses were two-way.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting intersection, though, Councillor, because that is an issue that's being fully addressed by the environmental assessment. So likely that's where it would be, because that's been raised by those whose input has been sought. So that's probably the forum where that would be resolved, because you got to figure that out when you're completing your environmental assessments. But just wondering if, I'm not suggesting it, I'm raising it on behalf of someone who asked me to raise it, whether your committee would at your next meeting, consider it, whether it's something you want to weigh in on. I think that's it. So Heidi, you have some suggestions or questions?
I just wanted to say what the position of Laurier is, as much as there is one view on with regard to the one-way, two-way and on Colburn and Dalhousie. And our primary goal is traffic calming, just to make it really, really clear. Our issue is the speed of traffic on both Colburn and Dalhousie, and of course, in particular, from Clarence to the downtown on Dalhousie. As you go up that hill, there's really no incentive to slow down at all. In fact, even I find sometimes I like to see if I can make that light at Market Street. So whether it's one way or two way, whether there's other, and I know from speaking to city employees, the idea of traffic calming through narrowed lanes, like this sort of thing. To my mind, we don't care. We just want to make sure it slows down.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Heidi, because if you visit my Facebook page at all, you'll shortly see a video on the pedestrian crossover, the first one ever in Brantford, and installed outside of Apotex, Spalding Drive. And as anybody who's been in Toronto, you know, a pedestrian crossover means the pedestrian has the right of way, so traffic has to stop. Not a typical crosswalk where it's kind of like a suggestion. So anyways, it is something that I've talked to Heidi about, and maybe there's a role that could be traffic calming as well, but maybe there's a role for pedestrian crossovers at some parts of our downtown. And so I'm wondering, Councillor Utley, if your subcommittee would, sorry, I'm adding to your list, but these are kind of these are some things that would be short term, can be done, and maybe they might help with the making downtown a safer place, certainly for pedestrians. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Wall. Oh, sorry, Heidi, did you have anything else to say to that? No, Councillor Wall.
Yeah, so I don't want to go too much into the weeds, as is said, but regarding traffic calming in the downtown, I've repeatedly talked about an idea, and I don't know if there's anybody who could provide any commentary on this, but the idea is that downtown needs to be a place you go to, not a place you go through. And speaking as somebody who the first thing I do when I get into my car is punch in the address I want to go to into my GPS, I typically follow that route pretty blindly. Those algorithms are based on the fastest way to get from point A to point B. If we deliberately make it difficult for people to drive through the downtown unless they are intentionally going to the downtown, then the GPSs of the world and the drivers themselves through their behavior are going to create new routes that don't involve causing congestion and speeding in the downtown. What does that look like? I don't know, but I've seen some really creative solutions in other communities, such as those yellow markers that go in the center of the road and line, and people slow down because they're afraid they're going to hit them, or some sort of speed bumps like that's on Dufferin Ave, which are like a unique kind of speed bump, not the traditional like parking lot type speed bumps that exist. There's also options of having more frequent stops. That's not good for the environment with idling, but I'm not a traffic expert. And I'm not saying that we should have people keep stopping. As long as downtown is a place you go through and not a place you go to, we're going to continue to have these problems because people are using, okay. So again, I don't know if there's any commentary that staff could provide. The only thing I'll say is years and years ago, I did a lot of work in downtown Kitchener. And if you talk to anybody who has to go to downtown Kitchener, unless you're going to downtown Kitchener, you avoid it like the plague, because you know if you go in there, you get stuck and you are stuck forever. And that's not bad if that's your destination, but it is definitely not good if it's not your destination. So I think I beat the point to death, but that's my commentary.
Just a reminder, members, we're not making any decisions today. It's to receive. So we're kind of trying to, we're raising, I would suggest, questions regarding what we've heard, or suggestions for items or ideas you'd like the subcommittee to consider. So we'll go next to
Mayor Davis.
Yeah.
My question then is, has there been any thought given to techniques to deliberately stall traffic in the downtown?
Stall a better expression would be calming, shall we say.
More so than calming, though. But
all right.
Yes.
So I guess, Councillor Utley, would you add that to the list for your next meeting? Sure.
Could you just repeat that one more time, please?
Going beyond count, because you heard from Heidi, she said, can you add or talk about calming measures? And
Yeah, I've got
Councillor
that.
Wall is saying, can you go one step further and talk about calming, traffic stalling procedures? Okay. I got that
For
right,
lack of a
Councillor
better-
Wall? Yeah. I guess just more aggressively calming traffic. Councillor, oh, no, I have Barbara, you're up next.
Thank you. Actually, I think Calendar Vanderstoot was ahead of me, but I'll be brief. Much of this conversation has already been held with Goggins Group, and I don't think Goggins with us today because I think that she could clarify this pretty quickly. There have been long conversations about traffic calming and two-way and one-way streets, and it's a number one item on her agenda, and her consultants who are working with her. So if I may suggest that Councillor Utley have a conversation with Goggin, and I think we can clarify this pretty quickly.
Yeah, maybe you can have her at your next meeting. That might help too. Okay, thank you, Barbara. That was a good point. Councillor Vanderstoot.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I'm sorry, I wasn't going to comment, but it seems as if we're talking about this option of one-way or two-way traffic as a function of the economic aspects and the safety aspects, more importantly, of the downtown core. I just want to make sure that I'm not dumping too much on the plate of Councillor Utley and his group, but it begs to be said. I mean, we live in a historical city which is affected by the interests of First Nations groups, which has affected our transportation master plan, period. We also are affected by the fact geographically that we're on the river. So there are a number of restrictions to our planning process in terms of transportation master plan. I understand Councillor Wall needs to move people to downtown rather than through downtown, but we're precious short of options at this point. I think it's just important to be said, you know, absolutely we wanted a safer environment downtown, or else Vision Zero would be rather purposeless at this point, or our involvement would be purposeless. But you can't subtract the fact that we have to deal with these mitigating circumstances, the unavoidable mitigating circumstances. And we need to address them, as well as the need for continued economic growth and development in the core, with perhaps changes to the traffic patterns. But I guess my word of caution is to include the increasing needs of transportation through the core. I cannot deny that. The numbers are going to increase. We're going to be sending people through the city of Brantford. And that is something that we have to be very careful that we're cognizant of as we decide how we're going to make these changes in a historical city. So that being said, hopefully we can hear more from Goggins Group. Hopefully I can speak to it a little bit more clearly at the council level, but it's something we need to be severely cognizant of. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, no, you're right. Our street system is part of an overall transportation network. You can't lose sight of that. So Councillor Heidi, yeah, just maybe I demoted you in space.
Yeah, that was interestingly and surprising. It's interesting and surprising. And I apologize. I'm not sure if I'll be brief because I've already spoken, but I did have a chance. In fact, a Laurie team had a chance to talk to Gagan about the streetscaping just this week. And so saw the latest, and regardless of where that particular planning ends up, one way, two way, this way, that way, whatever, I think the real issue that I'm hearing is the issue that will take 2-3 years to actually come to fruition. So the question is, if we're thinking long-term, I think whatever's in that plan after the continued consultation and discussion ends up happening, I think is going to be fantastic. The question is, what do we do in the meantime for those short-term goals? Or the short-term, like what can we do for 6 months? Because as I know some of you are aware, with the coming back of students and the kind of renovations that have occurred in one market and the flow for Conestoga students and Laurier students, the traffic patterns, the pedestrian traffic patterns have changed dramatically since prior to the pandemic. Now, for example, George Street and Dalhousie is going to be a huge intersection for student mobility from one part of campus into the other, which just wasn't there before. So that's what I think Laurier is concerned about primarily. And whether it's just that issue or a whole bunch of issues in the downtown, that streetscaping plan is a longer term solution and a fantastic solution by the looks of it to those larger, bigger, long-term planning type goals, but they don't address the short-term needs. Thank you.
Yep, excellent point, Heidi. Jacinda, your turn.
Yeah, I appreciate Heidi's comments and I fully support them, but exactly that, the long-term plans are great, and short-term, there will be a lot more students in the next couple of months, significantly more. And so just to, put that on the radar that, short-term, there's going to be some huge changes in the next few months. So finding ways, even if they're temporary, to address those would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions or hands raised. So let's go to the third subgroup for an overview. That's the safety and security group. And I believe Heidi, there you are, Heidi. You have the floor for the overview.
Thank you, Worship. Heidi DeVries, General Manager of People, Legislative Services and Planning, though I did turn on my camera once when you called on Heidi before. And I was thankful I did not have to speak to the crosswalk. I'm here to provide an update from our Safety and Security Working Group. We met on December the 10th and had the privilege of hearing from our elected MP, Larry Brock, who brings to this table over 30 years of experience in the court system, the criminal court system. And so what ensued was a very interesting discussion on a draft notice of motion or resolution that will be proposed from our working group to this task force for consideration. I'm hopeful in Q1 of next year. It was drafted in consultation with our city solicitor, yourself, your worship, and partially MP Brock. It's a work in progress. And essentially the discussion was around how do we as a municipality and other stakeholders advocate to the provincial and federal governments for changes to what is being commented on as a revolving door or a revolving system of justice. Interestingly, there was an article in the Brantford Expositor, I believe it was this week, the title of which was Judge and Public Furious About Local Bail System. So it appears that, the stakeholders here today aren't the only ones who are appalled and shocked at what's happening in our court system and are looking for some changes. And so MP Brock spoke with us extensively about his experience, what he's seeing happening at a federal level in terms of this system, rates of recidivism, both not only in this community, but I would say province-wide or nationally, and what we can do about it. So we are not helpless in that regard. I think that Brantford is uniquely situated here. We have all of these important stakeholders at the table. We're a mid-sized municipality with a local police force that is engaged. Chief Davis was present as well. And between Chief Davis, MP Brock, and Mayor Davis, I think we had almost 100 years of court and criminal justice system experience at that table. It was absolutely phenomenal. So what we have right now is a draft resolution that will be calling upon the federal government to review the changes that were previously made to the bail system, seize criminals or offenders, I apologize, released on very, very thin conditions, looks to the surety system and the inability to actually hold people accountable who put up money as part of that system and then do not act in a responsible manner. With respect to the provincial government, we did not actually get to those points, but there is a draft resolution. So I see a representative from MPP Bauma's office here as well today. So there is a draft resolution calling upon the provincial government that we will be reviewing as well. And what we're looking for there is actually increased capacity within our court system. So we know the provincial government is responsible for ensuring that we have sufficient judicial resources as well as space. So capacity both physically and in terms of the resources allocated to Brantford Brant. And we are also looking at some amendments either to the Safe Streets Act to create a more robust piece of legislation there, which our mayor has been asking for some time. He's nodding, and I'll let him speak to that. I don't want to steal his thunder. And we're hopeful that we can bring those forward to this task force for consideration. At that time, we will have the city solicitor present. Of course, she can't give legal advice in an open forum, but we certainly can provide the information that would form the background to those resolutions. That took up the majority of our time. So we will be meeting in January twice, once to finalize those resolutions, which will be circulated prior to that meeting, and the second time to actually finalize our plan in terms of prioritization and recommendations to this task force when it comes to all the other issues involved in safety and security. So we heard some of those here today from the other working groups. I believe there is some crossover, which just means we're all really on the same page. So certainly there was a recommendation from our working group that the task force does consider opening a washroom in the downtown core. As part of that, the recommendation would provide direction to staff to consider staffing that washroom with some security presence, because we know that an uncontrolled washroom in the downtown core has been problematic in the past for the city of Brantford. We also received a security update from Steve Ramnith, the head of the city's security team. Staff provided a very comprehensive report to Committee of the Whole Operations this month regarding an expansion of the city's pilot program when it comes to security. So we have security patrols in the downtown. They're recommending an extension of that pilot program for another 6 months and the possible addition of downtown special constables. And so that would be of interest to those on this task force as well. The report is available online. One of the things our working group was considering was providing a recommendation to this task force that would essentially see staff include in that pilot program staffing security at a washroom in the downtown. And one of the other items that we're presenting to the task force here today is actually an opportunity. So with great thanks to Beth, who's very involved in our working group, you may have the opportunity to possibly hear from some Laurier faculty who have done research on the issue of homelessness in mid-sized cities and may be willing to come to speak to this task force. We felt that information wouldn't just be beneficial to the safety and security working group, but would be beneficial to the entire task force should you wish to make time for a presentation of that nature, simply providing research on some of the issues that other mid-sized cities are experiencing and how they may be comparable to what Brantford is experiencing at this time. So that's my update, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, if I can, I'll just add. So Safe Streets Act, what that is it was brought in by the Mike Harris government. It was designed then to deal with aggressive panhandling, in particular squeegee panhandling. And what that law does is it allows the police to arrest someone who is aggressively panhandling. So it's not just someone standing by the side of the road, it's like aggressive panhandling. If they do it repeatedly, they can actually receive, rather than a fine, time in jail. And my position, advocacy with the provincial government has been in respect to the Trespass to Property Act. There are different kinds and levels of trespass. Some that are just nominal and don't threaten anybody, and there are others that really are very aggressive and maybe don't amount to a break and enter or threatening or another criminal code offense, but are really an aggressive high-level form of trespass, which leaves the property owners and others a little bit fearful. And I've been advocating to the provincial government, you should safe street the Trespass to Property Act so that, like right now, it's just a fine. You can do it 25 times, it's still a fine. Police can only arrest you and remove you from the property and then release you. So for really aggressive or repeated trespassing, that there be other options available, similar to the Safe Streets Act, which the police don't use Safe Streets Act, from my observations, unless it's really, really warranted. But it does give them a tool that, generally the way they use it, from my experience, is they let the person know that they will invoke the Safe Streets Act if they don't change the behavior. And that's probably the best, probably the better impact of it. Anyways, that's what that's about. Councillor Wall.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. Okay, I'm going to ask for the committee's indulgences as I ask a number of questions. And I just want to preface this with, much of these conversations are held over the phone or an email or in the hallways at City Hall. But I have made commitments to constituents I've spoken to about this task force to ask them during this meeting, for those who are wanting to watch it on YouTube, or just to know that these conversations are being had. So one of the number one concerns that I have heard from my constituents regarding safety and security in the downtown is who to call and when to call. And there seems to be some sort of hurdle with getting that information out. So some of the suggestions that have been brought up to me, recently the city of Brantford installed a number of signs all throughout the city talking about how long it would take you to walk to school, or people may be familiar with them or may not. If you see somebody having an overdose downtown, who do you call? Do you call police? Do you call 911? Do you call the fire department? Do you call bylaw? Do you call the security? I mean, obviously the instinct is to call 911 for something like an overdose. But what if it's just somebody having an episode? Or what if you see a crime being committed, but you call the police, and it can be complex. And years ago, we worked with the neighborhood associations to create a handout of who you would call and when you would call. But it seems like no matter how hard we try, getting the right information into the right people's hands of who to call and when to call is being lost. And maybe through organizations like Laurier and Conestoga and the BIA, and with the help of local business owners in the downtown, we could have signage, we could have posters, we could have handouts readily available to people. It saddens me sometimes that the first instinct for some individuals in our community is to start a Facebook Live video and post something tragic happening in our downtown core all over social media, but for it to not get reported to the proper authorities. And, the police are here today. I can't even imagine the overwhelming amount of calls that your system is getting. And I can understand how there's some complexities there. And then private property owners don't know whether they should. Okay, I'm beating a dead horse again. The final suggestion that was made to me was, would it be possible for Brantford to have its own unique number, like a 911, but not for 911, that residents of the community could call, and they could say, hey, I'm downtown, I just saw X happen, and then the operator would send them to the outreach team, or send them to the housing support center, or send them to the St. Leonard's, or send them to bylaw or to the security. And then instead of having to tell people, oh, when something this happens, you call this, we just say, see something out of sorts in the downtown, call 311 or whatever it might be. Is that something that is practical? Everybody's got a cell phone in their hand, and the hard part seems to be who to call and when to call. So could we have a one-stop shop for this kind of stuff? Okay, does that make sense? Thank you.
So through the chair, it does make sense. And just going to take a few steps back. In the case of an emergency, of course, the number is 911. And unless you're medically trained, it's difficult to know the difference between a medical emergency involving an overdose or something significant of that nature and a minor episode, as it was phrased here. In terms of signage and education, that is something that I can certainly take back to our working group. I mean, we are still in the process of looking at best practices from other cities. We have had some discussions about what other municipalities do, particularly municipalities who have urban campuses when it comes to colleges or universities. Often there are, those safety poles or signage, or there are other systems involved to ensure the safety of students, and whether or not we can actually make that a more coordinated system. So there are now, instead of, I'm aging myself, but when I was in university, there was a pole with a blue light and you could push the button and security would come. I think now most people have apps on their phones because we all have these devices in our hands. And so if I go back a few months, we were talking about coordination of things like that. With respect to the one number, on my plate professionally, outside of chairing the Safety and Security Working Group, is the idea of trying to better coordinate bylaw responses with the police and providing for a consolidated dispatch system. So that may actually answer that question, but it's something that I think would be great for discussion around our working group table, and we can certainly take that back. And what that would essentially do is you have a centralized dispatch, and that dispatch, based on the nature of the call, would know whether or not to deploy police, bylaw, or perhaps an encampment response, or simply a security team.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. Mr. Pang, David, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on the topic of the resolution regarding enhancing the Safe Streets, or using the elements of the Safe Streets Act and reforming the system of justice, the Chamber of Commerce is working with some of our counterparts to also develop a resolution to take to the Ontario Chamber of Commerce for a policy convention in late April. So working on that really over the holidays. So just wondering the best contact with the city to get the consistent, we'd like to take it to the board in mid-January for approval to go through our approvals process in that sense. So doing some heavy work on that in the next couple of weeks. Just wondering the best contact with the city to get that language correct.
So through the chair, I will send you the contact information for our city solicitor, who is currently holding the pen on the draft resolutions. So I'll flip you that email later, and I will not say her number on this open session meeting, because she's a great resource and I'd like to keep that to ourselves.
Excellent. Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah, thank you, David. Councilor Van Tilburg.
Recently, I think it was referred to just earlier in the presentation of an article in the Expositor from the Judge Pierce at the Bell system. And one of the interesting things is that people want to criticize the judges, and there's some people that are not allowed to criticize the judges, but here we have the judge clearly criticizing what politicians have created. And so meeting with Larry Block at our safety meeting was a very important step. For one thing, to see if he's on page, if he's in step with what we're seeing on the ground, and it was clear to me that he was. I think what he also made very clear was that actually government policies and procedures are going in the opposite direction. So while he has addressed the idea that we need changes to bail reform, and I believe that this is bail reform that we would support, that's going to be an uphill battle. So I would hope that we can get the committee as a whole, when the proper time comes, to wholly endorse bail reform in order and to publicize that, because you get outside of the city, we don't know what people are thinking, what other communities are thinking, but we certainly have to let them know what we're thinking. I've noticed in the last number of weeks, just very recent, that many of the judges that are being quoted now in the Expositor are having similar concerns with things that are going on in our community. Before it's community commenting on the articles and saying, what's going on, this is insane, because nobody's getting relief from the criminal activity. I'd also like to point back to this same thing, that not only do we have the community and the judges, but we also now have those who committed the crime agreeing with what we want to do with regards to bail reform. One of the criminals said, quite frankly, while they were still under addictions, which is a serious concern for our community, he was released on bail, and it was under the powers of the addictions that were controlling him that he continued to commit more crimes, and he had actually wanted to stay incarcerated, I guess is the proper term for it. He believed that if he had been held, perhaps these other crimes that he committed may not have happened. And while we can question or doubt that, what we can't doubt is that during the periods that he was incarcerated and such, and I believe he's now been released, I'm not 100% sure, but he's committed no crimes and he's cleaned up. Now, whether he commits more crimes in the future, we don't know, but we do know this. He's now like 1.5 years clean, which is a very long time for somebody who has suffered from addictions to say, hey, I've not been relapsing. So we never know. But what we do know is that when you have members of the community, members of our downtown, members in the safety community, our MP, we need to get, and I consider this one small step. It certainly isn't a solution, but it might be a solution for some relief for some people for a period of time, to get behind the resolution that comes forward and to have some sort of messaging system to get that across the community, because I do believe, under the circumstances that we've been facing, that not just those in the downtown, but all of our community would agree that those changes need to come. Sorry to pontificate, but I don't really have a question.
I'm glad you stopped, because I was about to ask you that question. But I'll kind of add to that, and because I'm helping with that resolution, and my role is not as a lawyer or as having legal knowledge, but as a politician. And the way this works is the council passes a resolution and it goes around. If you in your resolution, you ask your clerk to distribute it. it goes to 445 other municipalities. And they just generally look at the title of the first preamble. It catches their attention. They read it and they may bring it to their council. And that way you build a consensus. And I've tried to raise this issue with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus. And when I raised it a year ago, I just got a bunch of blank looks. And one comment was, well, it must be a Brantford problem. I didn't take kindly to that comment. But it's interesting. Patrick Brown, the mayor of Brampton, recently has been talking about this. So I think if we word this resolution right, Councilor Van Tilburg, have some catchy title and some good preambles, which I'm working on. And then the guts of it is being done by Larry Brock and those that have much better knowledge than I do. I think it could be a great resolution. I look forward to it coming. So I want to do one thing. And Deputy Chief Jason Saunders, you've been here and you've been a bit quiet. I'm not going to let you be quiet any longer because I brought forward your idea. I even said it was your idea to this subcommittee group. Somehow it didn't make it into the minutes, maybe because they didn't believe me. So I think we need to hear from the horse's mouth. What's that great idea you gave me that's about auditing?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I was hoping you were just going to run with that, and I would continue to sit there and be quiet. But I will. I'll share with the group. Just obviously, going through the survey results, one of the major concerns of the downtown core was the aesthetics and the appearance of the downtown core, which again, sometimes people did not feel safe when they were in the core. Previously, the Brantford Police Service had officers that were trained in SEPTED auditing, and unfortunately, as of today, for various reasons, we don't. But our commitment to the downtown core is that the Brantford Police will, in the new year, have officers trained in SEPTED auditing that we would offer to all businesses in the downtown core. It's a valuable resource that every business could take advantage of, and would provide ideas in which they can make their properties less targets of crime, I guess would probably be a way to articulate it. So probably the best thing for me to do, Mr. Mayor, would be to speak to one of the smaller groups in regards to how we would actually roll that out.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind speaking to Heidi, because Heidi is this group. And you also suggested to me, and could you just tell the group what these sub-2 audits are?
Yeah, sorry, for anybody that's not familiar, SEPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. And it's an individual who's trained to look at a property and identify areas that could be changed so that crime is less likely to be committed in that location. So what the officer would do, they would come into the property, they would follow, it's a very strict auditing process. And at the end of that, they would provide recommendations to the business. And it can actually occur for residential properties as well, and to make some changes in relation to their premises.
Right. Yeah, and for the group's members, when I was talking to the deputy chief about this, he gave an example. There's some properties in the downtown around that city have porches, they have vestibules, and at night they may become a problem because certain people might gather there. And so one way of street security proofing could be like hurricane shutters that are just rolled down at night to safeguard the property. But that involves an expense. So you also suggested, Deputy Chief, that perhaps the city might, or group stakeholders, a fund from which landowners could receive a grant to help them with these costs. Similar to what we do for heritage properties if they have a need to renovate or protect their heritage, or what we've done in the past for facade improvements in downtown properties. So I'm hoping, Heidi, that that might make the list for consideration. Both, I think the deputy chief and I are hoping that will happen.
To you, your worship, you are correct. You raised that idea at the working group. So we will amend the minutes accordingly at our next meeting, and I'll touch base with Deputy Chief Saunders on the idea so we can flesh that out at our next meeting. It's a very interesting concept.
Yeah, he even mentioned that maybe bylaw enforcement officers could also gain that skill set and be involved in that. Okay, Paul. Questions, suggestions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I be heard okay? I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I keyed in on SEPTED. I think that it can be a very valuable tool, as well as on the auditing and enforcement and maybe the heritage properties. Does the city's urban design guidelines contemplate SEPTED principles for new infill projects? The downtown money's coming in from developers from Toronto all over for infill projects. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to tool up your urban design guidelines for these infill projects to incorporate some of these SEPTED principles. Just wondering if that's a consideration.
That's a good question.
Right. Through the chair, that's a great question, not to my knowledge. You know, we have some exciting things happening in the downtown, as I know you're aware, especially with the new official plan and related policies, but that's something I will take back. And I think we'll consolidate that comment with what we've just heard here from the mayor and Deputy Chief Saunders in terms of a more robust program and even the potential for a grant program. We already have that urban growth area identified through our other through our official plan related policies and another grant program already. So it'd be interesting to see if we can align those things based on what you've just said here.
Yeah, if I can just follow up, I'm happy to lend my voice to that conversation as it moves forward.
Thank you, Paul. Heidi, you're next. Heidi Northwood.
Thank you. In fact, my thunder was just stolen. That's awesome. In fact, my question was going to be just in particular about the streetscaping plan that I mentioned that I just saw in the past week, whether those SEPTED principles are part of that. I'm thinking in particular about things as simple things, even like the placement of park benches, the design of park benches, all of that stuff that has, of course, a huge impact on the use of space and the both in, yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to spend more time just repeating the point, but I fully support that kind of view to the downtown design, streetscaping, as well as overall planning for the downtown in terms of flow, in terms of all of that stuff, right? That has huge impacts on the experience of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi Northwood. Barbara, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, may I ask a question of Deputy Chief Saunders?
Yeah, we don't usually encourage cross-questioning of members.
I know.
But just throw the question out there.
Okay, I'll throw the question out there is because, you know, and we think it's wonderful that the SEPTED audits will be offered to our business owners in the downtown, and that's much needed. There is another problem in the downtown, and it's altercations or aggression from customers that are entering some of our businesses, and some of our businesses have taken to, I don't know, buying out all the baseball bats in town because I've seen so many of them with a baseball bat behind their counter. And locked doors as well. So if there's anything that we can offer our businesses as our business owners as to how to deal with aggression or altercations between customers in their stores, we'd really appreciate the help down there as well.
So a de-escalation techniques.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Because they don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, and there are techniques, and police are experts at it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm sure the subcommittee will think about it, and I can see the deputy chief's already thinking about it. How that would work. So any other? That was a great discussion. Some good questions, points made. Anyone else want to say anything before I move on to the vote to receive? So this is the third and final subgroup. So not seeing any raised hands. So I'm going to call the vote. The vote is to receive the reports. So if anybody is opposed to us receiving, raise your hand. Not seeing any raised hands, so it's unanimous. So we'll move into taking care of our administrative business, which is the minutes, future meeting dates. And so you've heard about the subcommittees. They're going to be some of them very active in January. That's great because that's where you can get into a little more intense discussion about these issues. And so we have the suggestion that we have dates for this committee, January 20th, 22nd, and February 17th, 2022 be approved as future meeting dates for the task force, where hopefully we can start moving towards a conclusion with recommendations. So Councillor Well, are you moving that?
I'll move it, but I also want to comment.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Rutley seconding it. Councillor Wall. Comments?
Great, thanks. Just confirming, I guess, with anyone who's administrative staff here, this committee has the opportunity for delegations, right? Members of the public could register to speak, and then based on their commentary, members of the committee could then comment.
Through the chair, that is correct. Yes, there's a registration link online for every meeting, and I can distribute that link before meetings if members would like that to provide that to those interested in delegating.
Very much so. Okay, second, to date, have we had any presentations or delegations?
Outside of staff presentations, we have not had any presentations from external bodies, and I do not believe this committee has received any delegations since its first meeting in August.
Thank you. I think you're stating what I already knew, but I want to see that change in the new year. There are a lot of opinionated people out there, and I would hope that we could collectively as a group put a call out to individuals in the community who are not members of this task force to come as a delegation and to have their voice heard loudly. It's important that we do that. That was when I originally brought this motion to council to form this task force. The idea was that, yes, we were going to bring together the shareholders, and I'm so thankful you're all here. But it's important that we have people who are not shareholders here, and we hear what they have to say. So I would ask, one, I'm going to make an effort to request that people who want us to hear what they have to say attend, but I would ask the members of this task force to do the same. Not to necessarily say we should have 60 minutes of delegations before every task force meeting, but I think that there are some people who we should invite.
Well, I'd say this, Councillor. I mean, we did do the town halls, and frankly, it was a disappointment that we didn't get much more of a reaction. So, but you're right there. I think each of us occasionally will have somebody will say to us, I might want to come and tell you something. And maybe it'd be a subcommittee they might more appropriately go to. So I'd say let's keep track of it when we hear that, and maybe we can pass it down to admin staff, and they can send out an invite, or we can do a follow-up and say, well, if you want to, we can't do it for you, but do you want to come? Okay, any other discussion before I call the vote on those meeting dates? Seeing none, is anybody opposed to those meeting dates? Raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that's passed unanimously. So we'll move on to the second piece of admin business, and that's need a mover and second to approve the minutes of our November 18th meeting that was distributed in advance of this meeting. And that's a pretty simple resolution. Need a mover, moved by Councillor Wall, second by Councillor Van Tilburg. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, is anybody opposed to us approving those minutes? Please raise your hand. Seeing no raised hands, that's approved. Well, we have no notices of motion for today's meeting, so I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned. But I'm going to say I wish everybody that they have a very merry holiday season, a great and happy new year. Please stay safe as we deal with this Omicron surge, and I think we all know by now what that means. And I look forward to seeing you all in the new year, and keep your brains thinking about, occasionally you might think over the Christmas break about some ideas for this task force. We can move it forward to a really good and meaningful conclusion with some good short-term recommendations for council and some meaningful long and medium and long term.
Mr. Mayor, Barbara's got her hand up.
Yeah, I see it, Barbara.
Thank you. Excuse me. I just want to say a hearty thank you from the BIA and probably from our partners in Laurier and Conestoga for the time and the effort and the good work that has gone into this group, the task force and the working groups as well. We appreciate everyone's time. We know that you've had to take so much time out of your own lives and work. We appreciate staff, Mayor Davis and all the councillors and the police. and all of our community partners for taking this seriously, and I'm so impressed with what's coming out of this, and I'm impressed with the time you've given, and just allow me on the behalf of the BIA to say thank you very, very much for this work, and to wish everyone a happy holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. And I've said it before publicly, but I'll have to set this task force, but thanking you for twisting my arm and being the catalyst to getting this task force in place.
Ditto.
Yeah, I think you twisted both Councillor Wall and I's arms, and obviously to good effect. So with that, we'll call this meeting to an end, and stay safe and enjoy the holiday season.
Happy
Merry
holidays,
Christmas, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.